This is a public health issue. It should be no different than going to get a cast on a broken ankle than to getting support for your mental health.
High school social workers Tina LaMandola and Paul Thompson are speaking from experience as they continue to help students shatter the stigma surrounding mental health. Mrs. LaMandola says 1 in 4 kids will have a mental health challenge, and 1 in 6 kids will have suicidal thoughts. Among those kids are student athletes.
There was an uptick in basically that population coming into our offices and kind of talking about, things that they were struggling with, anxiety, depression, and then on top of it, the busy schedules that a student athlete would face.
Mrs. LaMandola then had an experience with a student that drastically shifted her mindset in how to help this population.
He was a senior, he was a varsity level athlete, and he had significant depression and anxiety, and on his own came down and asked to see me. And as depression and anxiety happens, it's really up and down, and he had some suicidal thoughts. He went to ECMC, and upon his release, he came down to see me, and it occurred to me he was in season with the sport, and he had opened up to his coach, and I thought, wow, that's pretty great that he was able to have the strength to do that. And I said to him, we know that mental health doesn't discriminate. There's probably other guys on your team that are going through the same thing as you. What do you think would help other athletes? And he thought about it, and he looked up at me and he said, well, you know how they have athlete trainers that come in and do injury prevention and talk to us about rest and recovery? And I said, yes. He's like, we need to do the same thing for mental health. And it was like a punch in the gut. It totally made sense to me, and I'm like, oh, why don't we think of this sooner?
From there, the student athlete mental health training was born. Mrs. LaMandola and Mr. Thompson attended training through Ross Sabo and developed their own curriculum. Presentations began in the fall of 2022, with Mrs. LaMandola and Mr. Thompson speaking to all 10 fall sports teams, both JV and varsity. Part of the training involved how to share your personal story with an audience, something the social workers decided to do.
I had a suicide attempt when I was 13, and through a course of therapy and medications, that really helped me find what worked for my recovery. And so sharing that initially, the first time that I shared that story with the athletes, I was nervous and I was vulnerable, and I was scared, honestly. But through doing our training, I learned that that's good to share your personal story. It does break down that stigma and normalizes for them that we've been through some tough stuff.
I did a lot of soul searching and kind of said, what do I want to share about myself, and what am I willing to get vulnerable about with my students. I share my own personal journey with post-traumatic stress disorder through going through the Army and the war. I basically share my recovery through that, what interventions kind of work for me, and that it's okay to address our mental health challenges, especially as a male perspective, right? Because I think a lot of the times young men are asking themselves, can I be strong and also face my mental health challenges? And the answer to that is obviously yes, right? But for so long we've been told that you can't have both at the same time, and now we're trying to break down that stigma and say, hey man, it's okay to go ahead and face those challenges.
And students like freshman Jeremiah Fields took note.
I think Mr. Thompson really showed that it's okay to get help, or if you need something, ask. Don't go through the men typical you don't need help, just walk it off.
The time slots were only 30 minutes, but most teams stayed longer, and some students even hung out after to ask questions or just talk. Students even raised their hands to say they've gone down to the counseling office or participated in a coping skills group, including cheerleader Rose Carpenter.
Probably the end of my 7th grade years when I started facing depression and anxiety, in my schoolwork, my outside life, my family life. It was nice to be able to talk about it with them. I was like, this is really nice. I feel like our whole entire team, and me personally, thought it was a really nice opportunity to just talk about something that every teenager honestly goes through together, especially with the people that you're with constantly. It really brought up the topic and showed us that it's okay to talk about it.
The success of the fall program led to sessions for winter sports, and presentations will also be given to the spring teams. It's also been expanded to include modified sports. The work has also continued in health classes and even general subject area classes upon teacher request.
I feel like this was one of those missing pieces that we didn't know was missing until we started doing it. It fits in beautifully to our mental health first aid because we were really working hard at getting staff trained over the last 6 years. What are we doing for students? And so it really tightens up our curriculum.
If I were sitting in class with my head down, not talking to anyone, my headphones in, if I'm having a bad day, I feel like it would mean the world for a teacher to come up and ask me, hey, is everything going okay today? And even if it is, it's nice to feel noticed, and if it's not, it's nice to have someone there to talk to about it.
Mr. Thompson says the success of the program has been incredible to see, and the results are in the students themselves, shattering that stigma.
I've seen that certain students that wouldn't normally come and knock on my door have been, in particular student athletes, or even like the stereotypical male who, you wouldn't necessarily see coming and asking for help for their mental health. These guys are now knocking on my door saying, hey, I've got some anxiety, I've got some depression, I've got an eating disorder, I've got some stuff going on. And my hope is that it's because it's breaking down that stigma. And I'm seeing it. I'm really seeing it. We couldn't ask for any better results.